I've told the story many times on this channel about how 30 FPS caps were literally one of the main things that actually made me switch from console to PC. I bought an 8th gen console and was frustrated and frankly taken aback at how little of a frame rate improvement there actually was going from the 360 to the Xbox One. I was annoyed that this quote next-gen console still felt sluggish and delayed because of the low frame rates, and around 2016, 2017 I switched to PC and never looked back. And in the meantime, the console industry has continued to reassure me that I made the right decision, because 30 FPS caps are still running rampant, despite the 9th gen consoles promising 100 plus frame rates. All the while, they're cranking up the prices of everything and shoving bugs and performance issues literally everywhere they can fit. Meanwhile, I'm sitting over here on the PC with basically any frame rate I want, infinite backwards compatibility. I'm not paying to play multiplayer games that I already own on internet I already pay for. I'm not paying out the butt for every new game that comes out, and I regret absolutely nothing. But the same can't be said for those who have continued to buy into the delusion that console gaming is still somehow the peak gaming experience or the way that gaming should be moving towards. I tend to tell myself that the reason people still defend the consoles so passionately is because they regret their purchase and just won't admit it. But whatever the reason may be for defending the console, be it regret or devotion to a brand or just good old-fashioned ignorance, it leads to some of these galaxy-brained console defenders out here resorting to some of the weirdest logic I've ever heard to make themselves feel better about the hundreds of dollars that they know they wasted. And the other day, a thread on Twitter slithered onto my feed that I couldn't help but talk about. It all started here. Dark Rider tweets out, "I wish more games would target 30 FPS instead of giving options for 60 FPS. That way we could get a bigger leap in gaming. 30 FPS is a perfectly fine frame rate, and those who want 60 can get a pro version of the PS5. Now, how you could possibly think there's a good reason for 30 FPS in the current year is beyond me, especially since a good number of games targeting 30 FPS on the consoles still can't maintain that, somehow. But also, this is just so backwards. You want more games to target 30 FPS, which is an outdated metric, and in return, we'll get a bigger leap in gaming? Like, what are you talking about? Bigger leap graphically? Bigger leap frame rate wise? I mean, obviously not frame rate wise, because you want 30 FPS. Bigger leap gameplay wise? That doesn't make sense. Gameplay isn't tied to frame rate. And rest assured, OP is going to tell us a little later in the video what exactly they mean by, quote, bigger leap. And yes, it's just as stupid as you're probably thinking it will be. And naturally, when I saw a take as stupid as this, I wanted to know who we were dealing with, so I went ahead and clicked on their profile. Their bio is literally just their PSN, which I think is what the kids call a red flag. Also, somebody go ring the bell of irony, because the literal previous tweet before this one I just showed you was them talking about how impressive 60 FPS was. So go ahead and add another red flag. OP also recently did a big ranking of all the Final Fantasy games, but they've only played 3 of them. So like, why'd you do this? It's kind of just a waste of internet. And they also called the cancellation of Last of Us Online a W, so double oof. Now, it should be pretty clear that what we have in front of us is a corporate slave of the console variety, the kind of person who looks out at the industry going back on their promises to raise their performance standards while also raising the price of games and raising the price of consoles, and then they look at all that and think to themselves, yes, this is all correct and good. I don't feel like I should have to explain why defending 30 FPS in the current year is just so stupid, because that's how self-evident things have gotten. I don't feel like I should have to explain things anymore, but in case you somehow don't understand why this take is so dogshit, stick around, because the reasons should become very clear as we go along. Because naturally, with a take this garbage and a ratio this bad, OP had to defend themselves, and with a take this garbage, defending it is impossible. And lucky for us, it's also hilarious. Retro responded, quote, "A bigger leap in gaming plays at GameCube frame rates." But then OP responds, "Increase in frame rate ain't a leap. Today I learned that playing games at a higher frame rate isn't a step forward for gaming. With mindsets like this, I can't imagine why games are continuing to target 30 FPS while raising the price and failing to launch bug-free despite lower metrics. I can't imagine why your lower standards are getting you worse products. But I also love that this is your response to Retro bringing up the GameCube, because, reminder, the GameCube also targeted 30 FPS for the most part, but it also had a number of games running at 60. Super Smash Bros. Melee, which came out in 2001, ran at an almost locked 60 frames per second. And now here we are in 2024, playing on consoles that came out in 2020, 19 years after the GameCube, and your metrics are still basically the same when it comes to frame rate. But according to you, an increase in frame rate would not be a leap. That wouldn't be a progression. Okay, then what do you want to call it? What do you want to call it when consoles from 2020 are failing to consistently target higher frame rates than a console from 2001? Personally, I would call that a ripoff. I would call that a scam. I would call that an industry with its head so far up its ass it can smell Last Christmas. I would call that a bunch of executives obsessed with graphics but fully aware that sheep like you will buy whatever they put out, so there's no reason to try anymore. But let's just keep going here. At Batshit Crazy responds to OP and says, hard disagree. This is why performance/performance ray tracing modes exist. Want prettier graphics at 30 FPS? Fidelity. Want better frame rates? Performance. A little of both? Performance ray tracing. All the Pro version is going to do is boost the performance a bit and make it run smoother. PS4 was the same way. But then OP responds, it is not about graphics, bro. So, it's not about frame rate, and it's not about graphics. You think more games should be targeting 30 FPS because you want a, quote, bigger leap in gaming, but apparently that leap in gaming has nothing to do with graphics or frame rate. So, what the hell is this about? And here's the kicker. DatSnick says, what leap are you talking about? Graphics are at a point where each increment costs a lot of frame for not much in return. It is beyond not worth it nowadays. Moreover, having 60 FPS mode is good for porting to lower power hardware. And here's the kicker. OP responds, the leap like GTA 6 or even better in terms of mechanics. Son, GTA 6 is not out. You don't know what mechanics it will have. You don't know how much of a, quote, leap forward it will be. But also, I have to break this to you, but game mechanics can exist at any frame rate and any resolution. I also want to go back to the original tweet here with this new added context because you're such a doofus you don't even realize that you contradict yourself. You say games need to target 30 FPS so they can give us a bigger leap in gaming, implying that gameplay innovation is tied to frame rate somehow. But then you immediately say the PS5 Pro can give you 60 FPS if you want it. My boy, if gameplay innovation is tied to frame rate like you seem to think it is, why would there be multiple frame rate options on the same game? It's almost like you don't understand what actually determines a game's frame rate. But oh wait, he's not done. Chrono S says, I wish devs would abandon 30 FPS completely and all games designed around 60 FPS. Bigger leap in gaming needs creativity and gameplay design, and games have peaked with graphics, if not overkill at this point, which is absolutely true. If you want to narrow down the issue with frame rate caps and with 30 FPS caps on console, this is why. It's because all the AAA publishers are obsessed with overkill graphics that don't actually complement the game or the experience at all. But then OP responds, gameplay mechanics can also take up space, plus there's nothing wrong with 30 FPS, why you would suggest to abandon 30 FPS is beyond me. Dude, by this logic, games with simple gameplay and simple mechanics should be running at higher frame rates, just like inherently. And that's obviously not what's happening. Redfall runs at 30 FPS and it's the most bog standard co-op shooter of the last decade. Meanwhile, games with really deep mechanics like Devil May Cry 5 can fucking crank frames even on the console because it was developed by people who actually give a shit about what they're making. And also, the RE engine is a piece of wizardry that Capcom should be licensing to absolutely everyone. Not defending Capcom's garbage DRM policies, but the RE engine is a piece of fucking wizardry. Another game that's very good looking with very deep mechanics, Doom Eternal, and it can run at up to 120 frames per second on the 9th gen consoles. The Demon's Souls remake, very deep game, very pretty graphics, 60 FPS, basically no issue. The 30 FPS caps that we've been experiencing are born out of a few things, those being a lack of proper optimization and publishers who don't give enough of a shit about providing their devs enough time to properly optimize. Because I seriously resent this idea that it's the hyperfixation on realistic graphics that's causing all the low frame rates, because Capcom, id Software, Santa Monica Studios, Machine Games, they've all been proving that wrong for years now. You can absolutely have gorgeous games that run well on the consoles, you just have to have a team that knows what they're doing and a publisher willing to give them the space to cook. And obviously results vary, but the point I'm making is that if you think 30 FPS frame rate caps are born out of more innovative gameplay mechanics, you're just a fool. Maybe game companies aren't targeting 30 FPS because their mechanics are just that awesome. Maybe they're doing it because it's the bare minimum they can get away with and no one is holding them accountable. But before anyone says anything, let me also acknowledge the fact that this doofus name-dropped GTA 6, and obviously Rockstar makes some insanely detailed and huge games. But GTA 6 is absolutely going to be running at 30 FPS, because the consoles would catch on fire otherwise. So Joe, doesn't that prove his point about frame rate being tied to mechanics? No, and I'll tell you why. GTA 6, from the looks of it, is going to be an incredibly detailed open world game. Big map, nice graphics, advanced AI, the typical Rockstar thing. But GTA 6's expected 30 FPS cap is not going to be because of its mechanics like Mr. Doofus is trying to argue it will be. GTA 6's expected 30 FPS cap will be because of the insane demand it's going to put on the hardware to render all this shit at the same time. Frame rates don't take a hit because of mechanics. They take a hit because of CPU and GPU load and memory load, and I'm sure to some extent the mechanics of GTA will impact the frame rate, but that logic simply can't be applied to anything other than a giant open world game built at Rockstar scale, if you get what I'm saying here. Basically, my point is that GTA 6 will have a bunch of deep mechanics and a 30 FPS cap, but it will not have a 30 FPS cap because of the mechanics. And for you to use this as justification for everyone to target 30 FPS going forward is fucking donkey brains. Let's keep going here. Cam responds, the PS5 Pro doesn't even exist yet, lol. Darkrider says, it will. When in doubt, dismiss people's legitimate criticisms because you might get something cool in the future, maybe. Like, I just love seeing people be like, nah man, Sony totally has our back, because the PS5 Pro is coming, you know? You know, the PS5 Pro that hasn't been announced. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't the base PS5 a massive technical disappointment? Like, how do you know the PS5 Pro is going to be running exactly the way they say it's going to be? Like, oh, the PS5 isn't running games as well as we thought it would, and neither did the PS4 Pro, and neither did the base PS4, but this time, this Sony console will totally be the one that blows us away, trust me. Like, seriously? Live action Zelda says, absolutely abysmal take, I hate playing at 30 FPS. OP says, sucks for you. That's right, if you think gaming should have progressed past 30 FPS by now, that's your fault. If you think it's lame that the latest consoles were boasting about 60 FPS and 120 FPS, but then started charging you $70 for 30, yeah, that's your own fault. Stop complaining. It's your own fault. Get consoled, idiot. Shadow Sniper says, bro thinks he's LED. I don't know who that is. OP says, unlike LED, I am not baiting, and I actually play games at 30 FPS on my PS5, on a 1080p monitor. This, dear viewer, is what we call corporate slavery to the highest degree. Because let's just break this down. You're talking about how 30 FPS is perfectly okay, 60 FPS is unnecessary, you're even suggesting that 60 FPS targets are holding the industry back from a leap forward. But you play on the PS5 at 1080p 30. So you bought a 9th gen console to continue playing at 7th gen metrics while paying more than ever for every new game that comes out, and you have the fucking balls to try and talk shit to people who expect the gaming industry to improve at all. You bought the console that boasted 60 plus FPS, 1440p resolution or higher, and you're only using it for 1080p 30 while saying everyone else is wrong for having criticisms of this. I had some more screenshots to talk about, but honestly, I think this is a good wrap-up. The people pushing back against higher frame rates are saying, oh, 30 FPS caps aren't a big deal. I honestly just feel bad for you, because you're going to keep paying more and more money for the same performance metrics we've been getting for literal decades, and you're going to continue being the reason why the corporate entities in this industry refuse to give us anything better for our money. And all the while, you could have just gotten something objectively better by switching to PC, and not giving your money to these companies who are blatantly taking advantage of your complacency, and then in a generation or two, you would actually be able to buy a console worth buying, because if people stop buying garbage, companies will stop selling garbage. But instead, you're out here making up excuses for the corporations who are blatantly taking advantage of you, and why? For what gain? They're not going to make the product better because you sucked them off well enough. They're not going to lower their outrageous prices because you're defending things being the way they are. But yeah, you know, just keep blaming everyone who doesn't think exactly the way you do for things not being better than they are. Seriously, the number of people on Twitter and YouTube who are perfectly happy to publicly and loudly be like, yeah, I'm contributing to this issue and incentivizing the problem to continue, but it's not my fault. Like, holy shit. Yeah, I shot that dude in the head, but it's not my fault that you shot that dude in the head. You're stupid. Toodles.